When it comes to the world of retro video game collecting, it can be really difficult to know where to start. As the years go by, what is defined as retro grows and grows and grows, as more games and consoles enter that classification. And with varying consoles and game libraries out there, with prices ranging from anywhere from a few pounds up to thousands and thousands of pounds, it can be really difficult to know where to start. And that is why I am here again for our annual episode about what the best console to collect for any particular year is. Kick off your shoes and relax your socks while we discuss what the best retro console to collect for in 2021 is. Now, what is classed as retro varies across the board for everybody. In all previous episodes of this series, I've always had comments that have told me that particular console doesn't class as retro. The definition and classification for retro seems to vary from anything along the lines of it has to be a system that uses cartridges all the way up until it has to be a system that is at least 2 generations old. Now, I'm going to put it out there, my definition of retro is a system that is 2 generations old. Therefore, a system that doesn't have games being made for it. Now, feel free to call me out for last year's episode, the Nintendo Wii, which technically still had games being made for it, but that's a bit of an outlier. For me, a console that is at least 2 generations old classes as retro, because for me, that fits the time period of somebody being able to transition from playing that as a youngster to being able to purchase it in their older years with some disposable income for those nostalgic reasons. Now, before we get into today's episode, if you do have a passion for retro games and retro video game collecting, then hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell as we delve deeper and deeper into the world of retro video games and retro video game collecting on the Chronik Spartan show. Now let's get into it. So for 2021, I have been thinking long and hard about what the best console is to collect for, and quite often I base my judgment upon what I am targeting. As a retro video game collector, I like to target video games and consoles that, in my opinion, are selling for a fair price at the time, or potentially the cheapest price in their life cycle. Back in 2019, I discussed the PlayStation 2 because games for the PlayStation 2 were selling dirt cheap. Some of my favorite games and some of the best games on the system were selling for 50 pence a pop. And with the potential of picking up a PlayStation 2 console for around about the £20 mark, it was an absolute no-brainer. And in all honesty, that console still to this day stands as one of the best consoles to start collecting. 2020 saw me introduce the Nintendo Wii, and again for similar reasons. Games for the Nintendo Wii were running really cheap. Not quite as low as the PlayStation 2 prices, but still really cheap. But the Nintendo Wiis themselves, the consoles, you were able to find them dirt cheap everywhere, especially on Facebook Marketplace. However, towards the end of 2020, we've started to see an increase in the price of the Nintendo Wii and Nintendo Wii games, as people have started to pay attention to it more and more. Still a great console to collect for, but in 2021, I'm focusing on a different one. Now, this has actually been a really difficult decision for me, and even right now, I'm struggling to pick between 2 particular consoles. And the reason being is that these 2 consoles have been neck and neck through their generation. Both of them have pros and cons, and both of them have different highlights in that particular generation. With one console, the benefit being that it runs games smoother, and the other console being that the library grew over years to become a better library. It is actually really hard to pick between these 2 consoles. And what makes it even more difficult is that the prices for these consoles and their respective games are pretty much neck and neck. So despite which console I may focus on today, you could probably comfortably collect for either one of these consoles and start off a fantastic retro video game collection. And if your definition of retro doesn't quite include these consoles, bear this in mind. Retro is a term that defines something old. And with every single passing day and year, consoles and games that are no longer created are getting older and older. And therefore, by that definition, any particular console that you don't class as retro these days will become retro in the future. And that is how great retro video game collections are started. By recognizing that in the future, these games and these consoles are going to be worth a hell of a lot more than they are right now. Now, with that being said, my recommendation for the best console to collect for 2021 is the Xbox 360. Or maybe the PlayStation 3. Either way, whichever of these consoles you focus on, for whatever reason it might be, they are both superb consoles to start collecting in 2021 for multiple reasons. First of all, the libraries for these video games are so strong, with so many amazing titles available. Now, if we want to nitpick between the two consoles, the Xbox 360 seems to run games smoother than the PlayStation 3, especially for games that came out earlier in the generation. Because you see, at this point, developers understood the technology of the 360 better than they understood the technology of the PS3, so it was easier for them to make games that ran smoothly on the 360. However, as time moved on and the PlayStation 3 became more understood by developers, we started to see neck and neck games, basically games that ran smoothly on the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. But this is where the PlayStation 3 could possibly take the lead. You see, the PlayStation 3 is home to some of the best exclusives around. Games like the Uncharted series. You can't get a game like the Uncharted series on the Xbox 360. Well, you can get a game like it, but it is going to be nowhere near the standard of Uncharted. Not to mention, we also have games like the superb Metal Gear Solid 4. You see, this is the thing about Sony, and this is the thing about the PlayStation. Exclusives. They know how to do exclusives, and they do fantastic exclusives. So for that reason, if you're going to pick based on library, you need to decide, are the PlayStation 3 exclusive games you're after? If they aren't, then you should focus on the Xbox 360. The next thing to consider as well is the price of these consoles, and this is where they run pretty much neck and neck. You can pick up an Xbox 360 or a PlayStation 3, I would say for around about £30 on Facebook Marketplace on average. If you're going into a store like CX, you're looking to probably spend about 50 quid, I'd say. But on Facebook Marketplace, they are going dirt cheap, and they are getting even cheaper as well. I am seeing huge collections being sold along with a console for essentially pennies, and this is because we have now got a new generation coming out. We've got the Xbox Series X and we've got the PlayStation 5. You see, when a new generation comes out, something happens. Sure, games and consoles of the generation previously get a bit cheaper, but they don't get to the cheapest. So the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One still warrant a decent amount of money, and that's because games are still being made for them. They are still technically current systems. However, the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 are no longer supported. There are no longer games being made for those systems. Therefore, people who have had those systems, who aren't necessarily retro game collectors or who aren't nostalgic for those games, are looking to get rid of them so then they can jump onto a newer generation. Whether they want to jump onto the PlayStation 4 now, or they want to make the leap to the PlayStation 5. And so for that reason, you are seeing whole collections being sold as people want to move to a new generation. And this is the sweet spot here. People are starting to become wise to the fact that retro video games can command a high price. But people don't think of these consoles technically as retro, and that is why you can find some of the sweetest, best deals on some of the best games around. Now, when it comes to hardware, again, there are some distinct differences between the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. You see, if you're going down the Xbox 360 route, make sure to avoid the original systems. If you're going to get a 360, I thoroughly recommend you go for an Elite. This is a much more powerful console, and it has hardly any of the issues we saw in the original Xbox 360s, so you don't need to worry about the red ring of death. Now, if we're looking at the PlayStation 3, you might want to consider some of the earliest revisions of the consoles, because if you go for one of the original 60GB PlayStation 3s, along with it you are getting full backwards compatibility for PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, and that is absolutely superb. My full fat 60GB PlayStation 3 is my favourite console that I own, and it's probably the console I use the most outside of the PlayStation 5. Now, it must be known that these consoles, the early generations of the PlayStation 3, can be temperamental like the early generations of the Xbox 360. They're not quite as temperamental, but there are many situations of the yellow light of death on the PlayStation 3. If you want to go down the safe route and you're only interested in PlayStation 3 games, then you should check out the slimline models. They are a lot cheaper and they're a lot more resilient too. Now, when it comes to games and the game library, both of these consoles are absolutely superb. You see, this is the point at which I think gaming took that step to the point where graphics became good enough and realistic enough that they don't look dated. Sure enough, a PlayStation 5 looks way better than a PlayStation 3, but you're not having a situation like when you're going back to a PlayStation 1 and you're getting those jaggedy triangle polygons which never quite live up to the nostalgia that you had as a kid. Anytime you go back to a PlayStation 3 game, it looks pretty much as good as you remember it. If you think about games like the Uncharted series and Metal Gear Solid 4, they are absolutely stunning. And the same can be said for the Xbox 360 with games like Halo 3 and Halo 4. These games still to this day look absolutely stunning and play fantastically as well. This generation was definitely a turning point in terms of graphics and in terms of popularity of gaming as well. That's why there are so many games available over a vast range of genres as well. And with the PlayStation 3, you can even still play light gun games. Sure, you need to have the PlayStation Move accessory, and I think you need the camera as well. So it's not technically the cheapest way you can play light gun games, and it's probably not the best either, but it's definitely a potential. Now, in terms of hardware revisions, in terms of games, and in terms of accessories, I'm not going to go into a deep dive here, because I'm going to save that for future episodes where I begin to talk about how you can start collecting for any particular console. So make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you get notified when those episodes come out. We'll be talking about the PS2, original Xbox, GameCube, Nintendo Wii, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and even handheld consoles as well. But we're here today to discuss what the best console to collect for 2021 is. And okay, I've been a little bit of a cheat this time around in terms of recommending the 360 and the PS3. So I'm going to commit. I'm going to pick one. And I have to go with the PlayStation 3. You see, I'm a bit of a PlayStation fanboy at heart, and I had a really difficult time with the Xbox 360 that left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. I got the red ring of death on Christmas Day when I had 5 new games for the console. It wasn't the first time I got the red ring of death. I'd had it about 10 times before and I was able to fix the console, but this particular time it was unrecoverable. And to have that happen to you on Christmas Day with 5 brand new games, I was furious. I put the thing in the bin and I bought a PS3 the next day, and I never looked back. As the years have gone by, I've bought an Xbox 360 Elite, and I love that thing. It is a great console, and I can definitely appreciate that it plays a huge amount of games better than the PlayStation 3 does. But for me, the PlayStation 3 is all about the exclusives. I love the Uncharted series, I love Metal Gear Solid 4, and on top of that, there are a huge vast range of games, Japanese games that are available for the system that you would never ever see on an Xbox 360. And for that reason, with these two consoles being so closely tied, if I had to pick one, I would recommend you pick the PlayStation 3. But that's my personal preference, and like you saw today, we're pretty much splitting hairs. You can comfortably go out and collect either one of these consoles and start a fantastic video game collection. And if you're put off by the idea that you don't think these consoles are retro, do not make that mistake, because in about 10 years time you'll be kicking yourself if you didn't start collecting these consoles and you see the high prices that they command a decade down the line. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to find out more about video game collecting and retro game collecting tips, then hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because like I said, we're going to start a new series on how to start collecting retro game consoles. Once again, thank you for watching and see you next time.